The snow began its slow descent just as the clock on Jack Carter's dashboard ticked past 6 p.m. The wipers groaned against the windshield, fighting to keep up with the gathering flakes. Jack gripped the steering wheel tightly, squinting through the dim light. His truck's headlights cut a narrow path through the dark road, framed by skeletal trees cloaked in frost. It was Christmas Eve, and Jack's mind was far from the icy stretch of Route 22 winding through the remote mountain pass. He thought about his wife, Lena, and the newborn daughter he hadn't met yet. For the past 6 weeks, he had been hauling freight across the country, each mile a reminder of the life waiting for him back home. Just a few more hours, he muttered to himself. His GPS confirmed it, 100 miles to Weston, the town where his family waited. The radio crackled faintly, a Christmas carol barely audible through the static. Jack twisted the dial, but the signal refused to clear. He shut it off with a sigh, resigned to the company of the storm. An hour later, as the snow thickened into a white wall, Jack spotted a figure standing at the edge of the road. A lone hitchhiker, bundled in a dark coat and scarf, waving her arms. Jack hesitated, his grip tightening on the wheel. Picking up strangers wasn't something he did, especially not in a blizzard, but as his truck rumbled closer, he caught a glimpse of the hitchhiker's face, young, pale, and desperate. "Damn it," he muttered, pulling over. The woman hurried to the passenger door, flinging it open and climbing in with a gust of icy wind. "Thank you," she said, breathless. "I thought no one would stop." Jack nodded, glancing at her as she adjusted her scarf. She looked about 20, with wild, dark curls spilling from under a knit hat. A small, wrapped box peeked out of her backpack. "Where are you headed?" he asked, pulling back onto the road. "Weston," she said, shivering. "My car broke down a few miles back." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You sure picked a hell of a night to travel." She gave a weak smile. "Tell me about it." They lapsed into silence, the only sound the hum of the engine and the relentless patter of snow. The girl introduced herself as Emily Harper, a college student heading home for the holidays. She talked about her family, her parents who would be waiting anxiously for her, and her grandmother who had recently passed away. The box in her bag, she explained, was a gift from her grandmother's belongings, a keepsake she intended to bring home. Jack listened politely, his mind still on the road ahead. The storm was worsening, and visibility had dropped to almost nothing. His GPS flickered ominously before shutting off completely. "Great," Jack muttered, smacking the screen. Emily shifted uncomfortably. "Do you know where we are?" "Somewhere between nowhere and Weston," Jack said, forcing a grin. But unease crept into his chest. Something about the storm felt off, unnaturally thick and oppressive, as if the world beyond the headlights had disappeared entirely. Then through the swirling snow, a faint light appeared in the distance. A diner, its neon sign flickering weakly. "Henry's place." "Perfect timing," Jack said, pulling into the empty parking lot. The diner looked like something out of an old postcard, its windows glowing warmly against the storm. Jack and Emily hurried inside, greeted by the jingle of a bell above the door and the smell of coffee and pie. "Evening," called an older man behind the counter. He wore a flannel shirt and a tired smile, his gray hair tucked under a cap. "Rough night out there," Jack said, stomping snow from his boots. "You don't say." The man gestured to a corner booth. "Take a seat. Coffee's hot." They sat down, grateful for the warmth. The man introduced himself as Henry Thompson, the owner of the diner. His wife, Marcy, emerged from the kitchen carrying a plate of cookies. "Not many travelers out tonight," Marcy said, her voice soft but tinged with worry. "You folks heading far?" "Weston," Emily said. Henry and Marcy exchanged a glance. "You'll want to be careful," Henry said. "This storm's worse than it looks. The pass ahead can be dangerous in weather like this." "Thanks for the warning," Jack said, though he had no intention of stopping. As they ate, Marcy hovered near their table, her gaze darting toward the window. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Have you heard the stories about this road?" Jack frowned. "What stories?" Marcy hesitated, glancing at Henry, who gave her a slight nod. "There's an old legend," she said, "about a woman who haunts these parts during storms. They say she was killed on Christmas Eve, decades ago. A hitchhiker. People who pick her up don't always make it home." Jack scoffed. "Sounds like a ghost story to me." Marcy's face darkened. Maybe, but I've seen things I can't explain. Before Jack could respond, the bell above the door jingled again. A woman entered, brushing snow from her jacket, a local police officer. Evening, she said, her voice sharp and professional. Storm's getting worse. I'd advise everyone to stay put for the night. Jack stood. Appreciate the concern, officer, but I've got somewhere to be. The officer raised an eyebrow. Suit yourself, but don't say I didn't warn you. Emily shifted uncomfortably, clutching her bag. Jack paid the bill and led her back to the truck. As they pulled away, the glow of the diner disappeared into the storm, leaving them alone once more on the long, dark road. The neon sign of Henry's Place faded into the snowstorm as Jack steered his truck back onto Route 22. Emily sat silently, her hands gripping the strap of her backpack. Outside, the storm raged with renewed intensity, the road ahead narrowing into an icy void. Everything okay? Jack asked, glancing at her. Emily hesitated. I keep thinking about what Marcy said. That story. Jack let out a dry chuckle. Ghosts on the highway? Don't tell me you believe that nonsense.
Road trip, hey?
I don't know, Emily said softly. But my grandmother always warned me about this road. She grew up around here, used to tell me stories when I was little. Things that never made sense until now. Jack frowned, but before he could respond, the truck lurched violently. The tires skidded on the ice, the weight of the trailer pulling them sideways. He wrestled with the steering wheel, his knuckles white, as the truck fish-tailed dangerously close to the edge of the embankment. Hold on, he shouted. The truck came to a grinding halt, teetering precariously. Jack exhaled sharply, his heart hammering. You okay? He asked. Emily nodded, her face pale. Jack stepped out into the storm to inspect the damage. Snow whipped around him, stinging his face. The rear tires had slid onto a patch of ice, but the truck appeared unharmed. He climbed back into the cab, brushing snow from his jacket. We're fine, he said. Just need to take it slow. But as he shifted into gear, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A figure stood at the edge of the road, barely visible through the swirling snow. Jack froze. The figure was a woman, her silhouette fragile and still. She wore a long dark coat, her hair tangled in the wind. Do you see that? Emily whispered. Jack nodded, his throat dry. The woman raised her arm, pointing directly at them. Jack's instincts screamed to drive, but his hands wouldn't move. He and Emily stared, transfixed, as the figure stepped closer. Her face became clearer, pale with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the storm. Go, Emily urged, her voice trembling. Jack slammed the gas pedal, the truck lurching forward. The figure vanished into the snow as quickly as she had appeared. Neither of them spoke for several minutes, the tension in the cab thick and suffocating. Did that just happen? Emily finally asked, her voice barely audible. Jack gritted his teeth. I don't know, but we're not stopping again. Further down the road, the storm grew even worse. The snow was relentless, piling on the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. Jack squinted into the white abyss, his nerves frayed. Emily fidgeted with her backpack, her fingers brushing against the wrapped gift inside. The antique music box had been her grandmother's prized possession, a relic from another era. But since she'd retrieved it from her grandmother's attic, strange things had started happening. Jack, Emily said hesitantly, there's something you should know. Jack didn't take his eyes off the road. What is it? This music box, it's been acting weird ever since I packed it for the trip. Sometimes it plays on its own. And tonight it's been louder. Jack glanced at her. Louder? What do you mean? Before Emily could answer, the radio crackled to life. Static filled the cab, sharp and grating. Then beneath the static, a faint voice emerged. A woman's voice whispering something unintelligible. What the hell was... Jack muttered, twisting the dial. The voice grew louder, fragmented by bursts of static. Help! Me! Emily clutched her backpack tighter. Turn it off! Jack hit the power button, but the radio didn't respond. The whispering continued, growing more frantic. Help me, please! Finally, Jack yanked the wires from the dashboard, silencing the radio. The cab fell into an uneasy quiet, broken only by the howling wind outside. Emily's breathing was shallow, her eyes wide with fear. That's enough, Jack said firmly. We'll get to Weston, drop you off, and forget all about this. Whatever's going on, it's not our problem. Emily didn't respond. She stared out the window, her reflection pale against the glass. They passed a mile marker, its surface frosted over, when Jack spotted another light in the distance. At first, he thought it was another diner, but as they drew closer, it became clear it was a car parked on the shoulder. Its hazard lights blinked weakly, the vehicle half buried in snow. Jack slowed the truck, his instincts warring with his better judgment. "Don't stop," Emily said quickly. "There might be someone in trouble," Jack said. Emily's grip on her backpack tightened. "And it might not be human." Jack hesitated, his hand hovering over the brake. Then, against his better judgment, he pulled over. He grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out into the freezing night. The car was an older model, its windows frosted over. He knocked on the driver's side window, but there was no response. Cautiously, he opened the door. The car was empty, its interior untouched. A thin layer of frost coated the dashboard, and the seats were ice cold. "Hello?" Jack called, his voice swallowed by the storm. No answer came. He was about to return to the truck when he noticed something in the snow beside the car. Footprints. Small, bare footprints leading away from the road and into the woods. Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He backed away from the car, his flashlight trembling in his hand. When he returned to the truck, Emily's face was pale. There was no one there, Jack said, but there were footprints. Bare feet. Emily didn't respond. She was staring at her backpack, where the faint strains of a melody had begun to play. The music box was turning on its own. The haunting melody from Emily's music box filled the cab, its notes tinny and disjointed, like a broken lullaby. Jack's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Turn that thing off," he said through gritted teeth. Emily frantically unzipped her backpack, pulling out the small antique box. It was intricately carved with floral patterns, its brass key spinning slowly on its own. "I'm not touching it," she whispered, panic rising in her voice. Jack risked a glance at the road ahead, his focus splitting between the treacherous conditions and the unsettling sound. "Throw it out the window if you have to." Emily hesitated, her hands trembling as the box continued to play. "I can't," she said. "It belonged to my grandmother. She told me it would protect me." Jack barked a humorless laugh. "Protect you? Feels like it's doing the opposite." The road ahead grew narrower, flanked by dense trees weighed down with snow. The truck's headlights illuminated a stretch of frost-covered asphalt, but beyond the light, the storm swallowed everything. Suddenly, the music stopped. The abrupt silence was almost worse. Jack exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Well, that's a start. Then the truck shuddered violently. A loud thump reverberated through the cab, as if something heavy had landed on the roof. "What the hell was that?" Jack shouted. Emily clutched the music box to her chest, her eyes wide with terror. Jack slowed the truck, his heart pounding. He peered into the rearview mirrors, but the swirling snow obscured everything. "Stay here," he ordered, reaching for the flashlight. "No!" Emily grabbed his arm. "Don't go out there." "I need to check what's going on," Jack said, his voice firm despite his own fear. He opened the door, the icy wind cutting through him like a blade. Stepping down into the knee-deep snow, he aimed the flashlight at the truck's roof. The beam caught a glimpse of something. Deep scratches gouged into the metal. His pulse quickened. "No way!" A loud crunch came from the woods to his left. Jack swung the flashlight toward the sound, but the beam revealed only shifting shadows and falling snow. He backed toward the cab, his instincts screaming at him to leave. As he climbed back into the truck, he found Emily staring straight ahead, her face pale. "What is it?" he asked. She didn't answer. Jack followed her gaze and felt his blood turn to ice. Standing in the middle of the road, illuminated by the headlights, was the same woman they had seen earlier. Her dark coat billowed in the wind, her hair plastered to her face. This time she was closer, close enough that Jack could see her sunken eyes and lips tinged blue with frost. "Drive," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "Just drive." Jack didn't need to be told twice. He slammed the truck into gear and pressed the accelerator. The woman didn't move, but as the truck hurtled forward, she disappeared in the blink of an eye. The truck barreled down the road, the engine groaning in protest as the tires struggled for traction. Jack's hands shook on the wheel, his breathing shallow. "What is going on?" he muttered half to himself. Emily didn't answer. She was staring at the music box, which had started playing again, its melody eerily calm against the chaos around them. Plus, the truck continued its climb through the mountains, the road winding perilously close to steep drop-offs. The storm showed no sign of relenting. Jack's heart pounded with every turn, every gust of wind that rocked the truck. Then the headlights caught something ahead, a bridge. "Finally," Jack said, relieved. "Once we're across, it's a straight shot to Weston." But as they approached, the bridge came into full view, and Jack's relief turned to dread. The structure was old and rickety, its wooden planks covered in ice. The steel cables groaned under the weight of the storm, swaying in the wind. "You think it'll hold?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible. "It has to," Jack said, though he wasn't sure. He slowed the truck, easing it onto the bridge. The planks creaked beneath the weight of the vehicle, and Jack held his breath, praying it wouldn't collapse. Halfway across, the music box's melody shifted. The once lilting tune became discordant, its notes sharp and jarring. Emily's grip on the box tightened, her knuckles white. "Why is it doing that?" she whispered. Jack had no answer. He focused on the road ahead, but his stomach churned with unease. A loud crack echoed through the air, followed by the groan of straining metal. "Go faster," Emily urged, panic rising in her voice. Jack pressed the accelerator, but the truck's tires struggled against the ice. The bridge swayed violently, the cables thrumming like a discordant symphony. Then from the rearview mirror, Jack saw her again. The woman stood at the far end of the bridge, her figure distorted by the storm. She began walking toward them, her movements slow and deliberate. "She's back!" Jack shouted. Emily turned, her face pale. "She's coming!" The music box's melody grew louder, drowning out the groans of the bridge and the howl of the wind. Jack floored the gas, the truck lurching forward. Behind them, the woman quickened her pace, her steps impossibly fast despite the ice. Her hollow eyes locked onto them, and her mouth twisted into an unnatural grin. "Almost there!" Jack shouted as the far side of the bridge came into view. With a final roar of the engine, the truck reached solid ground. Jack didn't stop, the bridge disappearing behind them. Only when they were miles away did he finally pull over, his hands trembling on the wheel. Emily opened the music box, her eyes wide with fear. The spinning key stopped abruptly, the melody cutting off mid-note. Inside, the box was empty, its mechanism gone. "What does that mean?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Jack stared at the empty box, dread pooling in his chest. "It means whatever's in there isn't anymore."